Alright, hello. I am here again to make another video documenting our adoption process. And today the video that I want to make is I want to talk all about what our home study looked like. This really cool thing has been happening lately that friends and people who watch these videos have come forward asking me questions about adoption and things like that. And while the focus of this is still going to be a video diary for Kyle and I as we move forward in this, I really love that people are learning from these videos and asking me questions about them. And I, going into this, had the most questions about what the home study process would look like, so that's why I really want to be pretty thorough about everything that we have done. Again, mostly for our sake, but for the sake of whoever else might be watching these. So I think I'm going to talk about this video in two parts. I want to talk about the application process, which is technically part of the home study process, and then the home visit process. So there was two parts where we were filling out paperwork took us almost 6 weeks to fill out all this paperwork, and then a couple of weeks of our caseworker coming to visit our home, sitting in our house, talking about things like that. So we've got a special guest. This is Boris. You want to be in the video? No, he didn't want to be in the video. So how I'm going to start this video is I'm going to read off some of the paperwork things that we had to do. We were very lucky. Our agency does all the paperwork online, which was better for the environment and a little bit easier because we got to actually see a checklist of what we had to get off. I'm not going to go through everything that we had to do because that would be a 45-minute video, but I just want to go through some of the key elements and things that we had to fill out. So the formal application was really just, it was a lot of us filling out our names, what we do for a living, where we went to school, where we grew up, things like that. And that had some specific things based on our state. We live in Michigan. It was a lot of policies through our agency. So a lot of things about the costs. So we had to sign some documentation that said we're very clear with what this might cost us. One of the first things that we had to do was a very, very long self-study guide. So Kyle and I both had to do a separate self-study guide, and that was a very long thing, kind of talking about how we grew up, how our parents raised us, what our childhood looked like, and what that translated to our adult life looking like. And so it was very in-depth. It asked us some really invasive questions. I shouldn't say invasive. It asked some very personal questions about our parents and about our family and about how we would we do everything the same as our parents did? What would we do differently? Why? What are some things that our families did that affected us as now that we're adults that we can see? The next really long guide that we had to do, the long self-guide that we had to fill out, was the cross-cultural parenting preparation form. And so that was really one of the most interesting parts of the paperwork for me. Was it was a very long questionnaire thing about if we get a child, if we welcome a child into our home who doesn't look like us, who comes from a different culture, who comes from a different ethnic background, what are our plans to help that child succeed? And it really asked us some questions that were very strange, and I guess they do have to weed out because there are people who won't accept children who don't look like them. And so they were really specific about, if you get a child who has a different skin color than you, what plans do you have to put this child in the community of people that look like them as well, so that you are not removing them from their culture and you are not pretending that their culture doesn't exist. And so it was really specific in making it very clear that if we get a child who is a child of color, for example, that we put them into the community of people of color so that they recognize who they are. And it was they were very blunt about a lot of the questions, like, what are you going to do? What access to the community do you have to make this child comfortable with that? We had to get letters from both of our employers. We had to get forms about our health insurance policies, things like that, credit reports for both of us. We needed to get a photocopy of some tax forms, birth certificates, driver's license, social security card, marriage license, if any divorce certificates were in play, which in our family they are not. Oh, a financial statement. So that was a very in-depth, here's how much we make a month, here's how much we spend a month, How much do we have in savings and loans, things like that. Another really cool part of what our agency had us use was something called a topics for discussion. And so it's something that Kyle and I both had to fill out separately, and it was a list of potential things or potential things that need to be addressed. And Kyle and I both had to check off a couple. I forgot how many we had. We had to check off as many as we had, but at least 6. And it was a bunch of potential concerns that could come up with this adoption process. And so it was like topics of things that Kyle and I need to talk to each other about. So I can read you a couple of the ones that I checked off. A concern that I had that I wanted to talk about my partner with was, how do I help my child develop a healthy self-image despite the teasing or rude remarks he or she may hear concerning his or her differences from others? That's obviously really important to me because not only are we adopting a child, we're adopting a child who is differently abled. The high cost of raising a child makes me wonder whether we need to postpone parenthood or whether we should explore a better way of managing money, perhaps with the agency's help. I really loved that. So those were just a couple. I checked off a couple more. I don't want to get too in depth. And Kyle's answers were almost completely different. His questions were almost completely different. But that has been one of the coolest things about what this process has done, like the paperwork, has really made me and Kyle sit down and really talk about a lot of this. How are we going to finance an adoption? What did your parents do? What did my parents do? How is it different? How can we merge those to create a really successful child? And so a lot of these things have actually been really fun and have created some really wonderful conversations. Again, I certainly have not scratched the surface of all the stuff that we had to fill out. That's just a couple of the things. It was a lot. The paperwork was a lot. Nobody is exaggerating that. But that was, I didn't mind the paperwork part as much because it was very much like, here's what we have to get done. Here's what needs to be addressed. You know, we had to make doctor's appointments. We had to get our TB tests. Like, there was a lot of stuff that we just had to get done, and it just took a long time. So it was very overwhelming, but there is nothing better than the feeling of submitting a completed home study application packet. Like, it was the best feeling in the whole wide world. So after we finish all the paperwork part, the next thing that happens is we get paired with a caseworker who then sets up some home visits. I was scared for the home visit. That was the part that was most scary to me, was the idea of somebody like coming into my home. And you hear horror stories about like people coming in and like ripping through your drawers to find whatever. And again, we're doing domestic infant adoption. So the foster care home study, it was a whole different other ballgame. Our home visits were really lovely. And I feel guilty saying that because I know that's not very common in the adoption world. The home study, like the home visit parts, are typically what scares a lot of people, but I loved ours. I loved ours a lot. So our caseworker was coming by on a Saturday, and Kyle and I both had that Friday off. And so Kyle and I deep cleaned our house. And when I'm talking deep clean, I mean like we threw out, I think we had 6 garbage bags of stuff that we just threw out. And none of it was necessary, is the thing, is people prepared me for like, you're gonna over prepare because you're nervous, and we did. And it was super normal. We deep cleaned, we sat around the morning waiting for the doorbell to ring. None of that was necessary because the point of a home study is not for a caseworker. At least in our situation, her goal, like the purpose of her visits, was not to say no, was not to decline us an approved home study. She was there to really analyze who we were, analyze who we truly were, what our lives looked like, and what that would look like for a birth parent. So she was really just writing an essay about us, essentially. And obviously there's way more to it. She had to do a whole lot, but she came in and we sat at our table for 2 hours the first day, and then I don't remember how many hours the second time. It was a little bit longer the second visit, but we knocked it out, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. She was lovely. My perception of caseworkers before this was like these really like stern, angry people who were like, you did this, you have this on your record, I noticed you have some student loans, and that was not what she was, and also not what they're there to do. She was there to make us feel prepared. So she gave us, there's a training in Michigan, Adoption 101 is an adoptive parent training, And so she gave us that on the first day, which really talked about like attachment and bonding and all of that wonderful stuff that you need to learn about. And then we just talked about who Kyle and I were. She looked around our house for sure, but she didn't go into cabinets or drawers or anything. She wouldn't have found anything. But, you know, the only things that she had to ask us about our home were like, do we have weapons? We don't have a pool, so she didn't have to worry about gates to a pool. And that was really like the big stuff that she had to address. So what was really wonderful was that it just felt like this person who wanted us to adopt a child sitting there writing stuff down about us. And it was conversations that were from our paperwork. So she looked at our self-studies and went off of those to get a little bit more in depth, and she uses that to write a really long home study about us. And so she took all of our financial information and she was the one to break it down, like, this is how much they make a month, this is how much they spend, they get to put this much into savings, blah, 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 blah. It was just like, it felt like a friend. It felt like a friend was coming over, and she was funny and she made us laugh. And I don't know if we just got lucky or if like the lore of the dreaded home study is a myth, because at least in the adoption world, not the, again, foster care, whole different ballgame, but she was there to help us, you know. And it was like, and she even said, she was like, if a situation comes up while we're doing this that raises a red flag to me, again, my job is not to say, no, you can't do this. It's to say, here are some resources that I think we need to look at before we move forward, right? And no one told me that. I guess they did. I guess they really did. But, you know, Kyle and I talked really extensively before she came about, like, we were all on the same page, you know, and again, if Kyle and I were nervous about being on different pages about big stuff, I don't think we'd be having kids right now. And so because we were very much on the same page and we had talked about everything so extensively beforehand, it was wonderful. It was really great. And she only came twice, and she stayed for a couple of hours both times. And then she was done. And then she wrote us a home study in 2 weeks that had everything. And so I just really enjoyed that part of it. Something that I really want to remember in like 20 years when I'm watching these videos again is I just want to remember like the level of excitement that I had the morning of, and like fear, but it was so surreal to me. It was like, I'm doing a home study today. I'm adopting a human, and so a person has to come in and get to know us. And I was so excited that I wasn't even that scared, because I was like, you know what? I was really confident because Kyle and I have a really good relationship, and we have a really good home, and we've built a really good life together, and we're adopting because we feel like we want to welcome somebody else into sharing this life with us. And so, I don't know, it was a really cool experience, and I wish that there were more videos like this that told me not to be scared of them. They're not bad guys. Caseworkers are not bad guys. Agencies are not bad guys. Their goal is to help kids, and if you are somebody who can help a kid, they're gonna help you do that. And it just was a really wonderful thing. So that's all I really have to say about our home study process. A whole lot of paperwork, a wonderful caseworker, and a really good feeling of success when you've completed it all. I hope that everybody in the world gets to have a home study experience like we had, because we were just really lucky. We got really, really lucky, and we didn't take it for granted, and we still don't. We've had nothing but a positive experience with our home study. You know, a little bit of argument because it gets stressful to fill out all that paperwork, but ultimately, I hope everybody, like I said, gets to have an experience like we did, because it was great, and I want to remember that forever, that our home study experience was wonderful. And that's why I'm making these videos, is to remind myself of that. And if future baby Johnson is watching this, I want you to know it's all going to be worth it. None of it seemed insurmountable, and the result eventually will be baby Johnson. So we're excited. I'm excited I got to make this video for you and myself, and hope you all, whoever is watching this, is having a great day, and I'll see you guys, whoever, soon. See you later.